this video, we're just going to go through some last-minute exam tips for the GCSE RS Paper 1, Christianity and Islam. So firstly, timing. Make sure you work on both the Christianity and Islam papers for equal amounts of time. The total time for both papers is 1 hour 45 minutes. Aim for 50 minutes for each paper, and that will leave you with 5 minutes at the end to check your work. So essentially, we're talking about 25 minutes for Christianity beliefs, and then 25 minutes for Christianity practices, 25 minutes for Islam beliefs, and then 25 minutes for Islam practices. If you have extra time to complete the exam, the standard is sort of 25% extra time, then you should aim to spend 30 minutes on each set of questions, which again will leave you with around 5 minutes at the end to check your work. So let's go through now all of the different styles of questions you're going to encounter in this exam. So with the 2 markers, remember you don't have to answer in full sentences. You need to keep your answers short and snappy, but long enough so that your points are clear and specific enough to earn the marks. So if we look here at this first example from Christianity practices, the question says, give 2 ways in which the church helps Christians to respond to persecution. And a candidate here has written pray and give. Well, there wouldn't be any marks really available for that because it's just simply not clear that they really even know what persecution is and how praying and giving might in any way help. So just a few extra words will help the candidate earn the marks though. So instead of pray, you write praying that God helps people being persecuted, and you could even give an example of where persecution is happening. Or giving money to support the Open Doors charity. So rather than just saying give, literally be a bit more specific and you can earn the marks. So sometimes, as you can see with the second example, it's perfectly valid to just give 2 words to earn the 2 marks. So in that example, give 2 of the 6 articles of faith, and we've got Tawheed and prophethood. You don't need to explain those. When your answers are a little bit more generic, a bit more general, like pray and give, to earn the points, you are going to need to just give a bit more detail and development. Now with 4 markers, you need to remember to structure your answer clearly. So state your first point and then develop it with more detail, explanation, or even a religious teaching. Then you state your second point and again develop it with more detail, explanation, or religious teaching. Aim to leave a line between your 2 points if that's possible with your size of handwriting, because it will make your answer a bit clearer for the examiner who will be marking hundreds of answers. Also aim to use the words from the question at the start of each part of your answer. Doing this will help focus your mind and your answer, and will also make your points clearer to the examiner too. So this is how that would look. So explain 2 ways that belief in incarnation influences Christians today. The first section starts off, 1 way that belief in incarnation influences Christians is that because they believe Jesus was God incarnate, God in human form, they believe Jesus understands human problems. This means they may pray to Jesus when they're facing difficulties as they know he understands. Leave a line. And then a second way belief in incarnation influences Christians is that they will celebrate the incarnation at Christmas. They will remember at Christmas that the reason for the season is that the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. So with your 5 markers, you want to use basically the same structure as for the 4 markers, but of course there is the extra mark, which we'll come to in a sec. So just like with the 4 markers, you state your first point, add development, and then state your second point and add development. Remember though that there is an extra mark available for those links to sacred writing or another source of authority. So hopefully you will know a specific religious teaching from sacred writing that you can use for each of the 5 markers. So for example, in a question about creation in Christianity and Christian beliefs, the Bible teaching God created the heavens and the earth could be used. Remember, whenever you use a specific religious teaching, you should always state where it's from. So like I did there, the Bible teaching, God created the heavens and the earth. However, if your mind goes blank in the exam, or you get stuck and you can't think of any specific religious teachings like quotes, I want you to remember the tips that we're going to go through now. So, all Christian beliefs that we study in this AQA course, apart from the beliefs about sin and salvation, are actually found in the Apostles' Creed. What that means is, in a 5 marker, you can always link to the Apostles' Creed. You could always write something like Christian beliefs about whatever it is, are found in the Apostles' Creed. So Christian beliefs about Trinity, Christian beliefs about life after death, Christian beliefs about the crucifixion, Christian beliefs about the ascension. So the Apostles' Creed is a recognised source of authority in Christianity, so reference to it will secure you the extra mark. So hopefully you can see from my model answer below how you could slot that in. So explain 2 different Christian beliefs about the Trinity. Literally, you could start it off by writing Christian beliefs about the Trinity are found in the Apostles' Creed, and then follow that structure that we just talked through for the 4 marker. So you give your point, development, obviously with the line left in the middle if you can squeeze that in the space available. So beliefs about sin and salvation aren't in the Apostles' Creed. Okay, but they are found in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, as well as all of the other Christian beliefs we study are. So the Catechism of the Catholic Church is a recognised source of authority in Christianity. So again, you can link to it in a 5 marker. So you could add, like we did before for the Apostles' Creed, a sentence that literally says beliefs about this are found in the Catechism of the Catholic Church. Of course, you do need to tie that to something that Catholics do believe. So in this case, it's a question about original sin. So it's perfectly valid to link there to the Catechism of the Catholic Church. Let's have a look at the full answer. So explain 2 different Christian beliefs about original sin. Well, one Christian belief about original sin is in the Catholic Church, where it's believed that baptism washes original sin away. For this reason, baptism is carried out on babies and is important for the Catholic Church. Beliefs about this are found in the Catechism of the Catholic Church. So there's your extra mark for source of authority. A second Christian belief about original sin is that it comes from the disobedience of Adam and Eve. Originally, the world was perfect, but when Adam and Eve disobeyed God, sin was introduced into the world. So the Catechism of the Catholic Church is quite helpful because it also refers to all key Christian practices in our course, obviously from a Catholic point of view. So it would also usually be valid to use in a practices 5 marker if you're stuck. So here's an example of that in relation to the pilgrimage question. So explain 2 reasons why going on pilgrimage is important for many Christians. One reason why going on pilgrimage is important is because it offers a chance to get closer to God. When Christians go to Iona on pilgrimage, they feel it is a thin place where God is there in the beauty of nature and is much closer than usual. Note, again, I'm linking to the question in the beginning phrase of each section, and we've got a line in between the 2 sections. So moving on to the second reason, another reason why going on pilgrimage is important is because it can provide hope for healing from illness. When Christians go up to Lourdes on pilgrimage, they may have hope that God will heal them, as many other people have been healed by the holy water that miraculously appeared. And then we have our link to source of authority. Beliefs about the importance of pilgrimage are found in the Catechism of the Catholic Church. Now, when it comes to Christian practices around how Christians take action, whether that's against persecution, poverty, or just trying to grow the church, remember that Jesus' teachings to love one another and love your neighbour will usually apply. What you have to do, though, is show the examiner that you are aware that it was Jesus that said these teachings, and also that they're in the Bible. You can't just throw in love your neighbour into your answer and hope for the best. You need to clearly state that Jesus taught love your neighbour and show how that is relevant. Now, moving on to Islam, again, there's some patterns and some tricks that you can use if you're struggling to think of a specific teaching from the Quran in a 5 marker. So all Muslim beliefs that we study in this course, apart from the beliefs about the imamate, predestination and adalat, are in the 6 articles of faith. So therefore, you can almost always state in your 5 marker that belief in whatever the focus of the question is one of the 6 articles of faith. So it could be prophets, it could be the oneness of God, it could be angels, it could be life after death. You can always link to the 6 articles of faith. This is a recognised source of authority, so it absolutely will secure you the mark. So you can see how this would look in this question about angels. So explain 2 different Muslim beliefs about angels. I've literally started off the answer by stating belief in angels is one of the 6 articles of faith. And then I go on to give my first point about angels being messengers, point of development. and then again a second point, and then a point of development. Now, the Shia beliefs in the Imamate and Adalat, which are quite specific to Shia Islam, are found in the 5 roots of Usul ad-Din. They're also found in that alongside other beliefs that are found in the 6 articles of faith, such as Tawheed, prophethood, and beliefs about what will happen when we die. So, if you get a question about Imamate or Adalat, for example, and it's a 5 marker, it's really valid to give the statement that belief in Adalat or Imamate is one of the 5 roots of Usul ad-Din. Now remember also that all Muslim beliefs we study, and also all practices to be fair too, apart from Imamate, are stated in the Quran, and so they're always going to be really important because the Quran is the scripture of which there is no doubt. And you can refer to this teaching in your answers too if you get stuck with a tricky question and you can't think of a specific teaching. So if you look at the example here, you can see what it looks like in this quite difficult question about predestination. So explain 2 different Muslim beliefs about predestination. We've got one Muslim belief about predestination is that because God is all-knowing and all-powerful, God has already planned out what will happen to each person. Everything that happens to each person, is part of God's plan. A second, slightly different belief about predestination is that God can see everything that will happen to us in our life, but has not planned it out already. Beliefs about predestination are found in the Quran. This means that even though they are hard to understand, they are accepted because the Quran is the scripture of which there is no doubt. So you could literally use that same couple of sentences if the question was about life after death, or if it was about angels, or if it was about prophets. Okay, you can make the point that some of these concepts are quite tricky, but they are always accepted, even though there may not be any evidence today of things like angels or even that, there were prophets. They're accepted because they're in the Quran, which is the scripture of which there is no doubt. So that's a teaching that you absolutely need to know and to remember if you're stuck in the exam. Now, in terms of practices, obviously the 5 pillars of Islam are a valid source of authority. So that means that referring to them in a 5 marker counts for the extra mark in the same way that those specific religious teachings from the Quran do as well. So you can literally say, if it was a question about Salah, for example, that Salah is one of the 5 pillars in Islam. If it was a question about almsgiving, you could say almsgiving or zakah is one of the 5 pillars of Islam, and that will give you the mark if you can't think of a specific religious teaching from the Quran that you can use to get your source of authority point instead. Remember that Shia Muslims follow the 10 obligatory acts, which is an important source of authority for them. So in addition to 4 of the 5 pillars, so the one that's not in the 10 obligatory acts is of course the Shahada, the declaration of faith. The other 4 are in the 10 obligatory acts. So Salah, Zakah, Sawm and Hajj are in there, and Jihad and Khums that are specifically named in the spec are also there too. So they're the key extra practices in the 10 obligatory acts. So if you were to get a question about Jihad or Khums, it's perfectly valid to claim the valid source of authority mark by stating that they are part of the 10 obligatory acts. Now, when it comes to Islamic festivals and celebrations, remember Eid al-Fitr and Eid al-Adha are both referred to in the Quran, which is the scripture of which there is no doubt, so the same teaching can be used. But please be careful and remember that the Shia understanding of Ashura is not included in the Quran, so you can't use that teaching to back up any kind of point about Ashura. Now finally, let's just run through some points about 12 markers. So this is really where the grades are going to be decided, isn't it? The 12 markers. So keep an eye on timing. Aim to spend half the time for each section on the 12 marker, which means if you're spending 25 minutes on, say, the Islam belief section, as is advised, you should be spending at least 13 minutes on the 12 marker. Now, the exam board are actually really kind to you because they give you a list of bullet points underneath the question. You need to include everything that the exam board is asking you to do in these bullet points if you want to achieve a good mark out of 12. So what I would suggest that you do is that you use the wording from the question at the start of each section to show that you are focused on the question. So in this case, the Lord's Prayer is the only prayer that Christians need to use. My first section would start with the phrase, Firstly, the Lord's Prayer is the only prayer that Christians need to use because, and I've said it's the prayer Jesus taught when he was asked by his disciples how people should pray. Then I would back up that argument, which I would have obviously further developed, by making another argument. So, for example, the Lord's Prayer is also the only prayer that Christians need to use because, and again, the reason I've got here is it covers all the aspects of Christian prayer, such as praising God through the words, "Hallowed be your name." Then, giving arguments to support a different point of view, I start, however, the Lord's Prayer is not the only prayer that Christians need to use because, and I've gone on and made an argument about maybe wanting to pray specifically to Jesus. And then lastly, the Lord's Prayer is also not the only prayer that Christians need to use because, and I've made an argument that otherwise there wouldn't be like lots of other prayers that exist. So please be really careful that you definitely include arguments that support the statement and arguments that go against it, because that's needed to be marked out of 12 for the 12 marker. And then also please try and follow this pattern and just keep linking back to the question, because it helps to make your answer super clear. Now, always remember to include a conclusion as well at the end of your work. You're going to lose marks if you don't do that. I really recommend that in your conclusion, you try to do two things if you can. So firstly, try and give your own opinion backed up by a reason that's based on evidence. And secondly, say what you think the argument with the most evidence overall to support it is. So this is what this might look like for this particular 12 marker on the Lord's Prayer. So I've written, in my opinion, I think that the Lord's Prayer is probably the only prayer that Christians need to use because Christianity is all about following Jesus, and Jesus taught the words of this prayer. However, the argument with the most evidence to support it overall is that the Lord's Prayer is not the only prayer that Christians need to use. This is because there are so many other prayers that have been written to express different beliefs and ask God for help with different things. And also many Christians may want to develop their relationship further with God by coming up with their own personal words when they pray, which means that they need to go beyond just the Lord's Prayer. So just to reiterate, please remember to include a conclusion at the end. And if you can, try to both give your own opinion and also state what you think the most persuasive and the argument with the most evidence overall to back it up is. Now, lastly, if you find that you are running out of time, you're doing maybe the last 12 marker, you're running out of time, this is what you need to do. You need to make sure that you have tried to cover all of the bullet points that the exam board asks you to cover in your answer, even very briefly. That will usually allow you to score more marks than if you say only get halfway down the list and you've given really clear reasons, arguments to support the statement, but then you just run out of time. So you don't then give a different point of view and you don't then give a conclusion, okay? If you're pushed for time, try to just do everything that it asks you to do in those bullet points. So try to get in reference to teaching, whether it's Christian or Islamic, will obviously depend on which paper, but follow the guidance there. Make sure you've got an argument to support the statement, an argument against, at least one on both sides, and make sure that you definitely have a conclusion at the end. Okay, so if you panic, if you're running out of time, try to stay focused, just look at what they've asked you to do in the bullet points and just make sure you've covered each one of those. Obviously, if you're running out of time, you're not going to be able to cover it to the fullest extent, but having a go at each one of those will always be better than just giving like one side of the argument. And lastly, good luck. Go well. Try your best.